Hello, my Bill 1000 Nation. How's everyone doing today? Hopefully, everyone's having a great day. If not, I hope it gets better from here. Before we get into our video, go ahead and forewarn you guys, I have seen all this week's videos. For those of you who don't follow the channel closely or are new to the channel, I don't know what the fuck happened, okay? I'm just going to go ahead and put it like that. I really don't. I mean, I do, but I don't know how it happened. I recorded my videos. Me? Can't hear. Video, MrBallen, hear just fine. The intro music, hear just fine. For some reason, I wasn't there. I know why now. I just don't quite still understand, but I know why-ish. Because if anyone has ever used OBS, and if you haven't, there is different sections. You got audio output, audio input. They have these little bars on them that go up and down, 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 up and down. And you keep it either in the green and the yellow, or you can peek at the red. I keep mine in the green, slightly going into the yellow. That's just how it sounds better that way. And when I'm talking, it moves up, up, up. When MrBallen's talking, it's moving up. It did that the whole time. So to me, it's hearing me. It's got to, you know what I mean? But no. Evidently, that's just a no. I guess whenever I did the last update, like I normally do, I normally go in and I check, make sure everything's the way my settings are supposed to be. Anyone who uses OBS knows exactly what I'm talking about. OBS sometimes can be a little bit of a bitch. That's live. I didn't check, and the tracks for my audio was all turned off. Like, it was reading me, it was capturing it, but it wasn't actually recording it because it was turned off for some reason. I'm guessing that's what it was because I turned them all back on, did a few little test things like, hello, 1, 2, testing, 1, 2, 3, you know, like an idiot, talking to myself, kind of like I am now, but there's you guys later. As far as I know, it's working. Whether it stays working, I don't know. I hope so. I don't want to have to rewatch these again, because those of you who are newer to the channel, I really don't like to watch the same video over and over again. I know it has happened because it's like, man, this seems very familiar, but I have a horrible memory. I truly do. It's not just something I say. It's shit. I have a shit memory. So, but all that aside, I'm pretty sure I got everything figured out. Hopefully you guys kind of like the new little background I got going on here. I've worked on that. Been busy. It's been hot as the devil's taint. Can't really go outside. But I've worked on a few things. I got everything figured out. I'm pretty sure we're ready. We're good to go. But I just wanted to forewarn everyone. I have seen these videos. I'm not the biggest fan of watching them over and over. I do like to be more blindish on the reactions. I don't mind to watch the same from different videos, like MrBallen covered something, that chapter covers something, whatever covers something. That don't bother me. So if I'm not as, I've watched them. I am sorry. But these should have came out last week. I'm not going to just not put them out because some of them was requested by subscribers and viewers, and that's not what this channel's about. I know I haven't gotten to all the requests like that, but there's a lot of them. I have a notebook. I do. And I think that's it. Other than being hotter than the devil's taint, I ain't got nothing else. I mean, I think I melted 3 inches. I feel short. Yeah. All right. Now, all that aside, who's ready to get in today's video? Hopefully, you guys are. Because if you are, go ahead, turn them lights down low, put on something comfy, cuddle up with someone special. Cuddle up with someone special. There we go. Let's get... Oh, what was this one about? Worst family tradition. Oh yeah, this one's titled The Worst Family Tradition Ever, Document Mature Audiences Only. Let's get mature really, really fast. I think I said that last time too. See, it just feels weird. It do.
Today, we're going to cover 3 strange but true stories. Fair warning, the top story today is absolutely repulsive, so if that's not your thing, you've been warned. But before we get into today's stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place because that's all we do, and we upload once a week. If that's of interest to you, wait until the like button has left for their summer vacation, and while they're gone, completely decorate the interior and exterior of their house for Christmas. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's stories.
Shit, if I'm not mistaken, my mom's already decorated for Christmas. That's just how she roll, bro. She don't give a fuck. Christmas is her favorite holiday. She'll keep it up all year long if she wants to.
On the morning of September 23rd, 1839, an experienced sailor named Captain Brighton stood on the deck of his ship, which was traveling through the Drake Passage, which is located right along the northern coast of Antarctica. He and his crew had sailed here because they were professional whalers, and they had heard there was this massive population of whales in the Drake Passage that basically were untouched by humanity because basically nobody sailed this far. This was a freezing cold, very austere part of the world, kind of a dangerous place to be. But so far, Captain Brighton and his crew had not seen a single whale. And on top of that, the Drake Passage had proven to be as dangerous as expected. Just the previous night, the ocean around the ship had literally frozen, basically anchoring the ship in place. Damn. And so when this happened, Captain Brighton realized there was nothing they could even do about this. I mean, they were stuck. And if this didn't break up soon, they'd be stuck here all winter potentially, and it was unclear if they could actually survive that. But fortunately, also the previous night, this massive storm rolled in, which, that's dangerous in and of itself. But the severity of the storm was actually a good thing, because it broke up the ice around the ship and allowed Captain Brighton to sail away. And so now, that morning, the ocean was again, liquid, so they were able to move around, but Captain Brighton had a very difficult decision to make. Again, so far they have not caught any whales, and they've invested a lot of time and money to get out here. But, if he stayed out here much longer, he knew they could potentially get stranded again, and he just couldn't let that happen. And so he needed to decide if he was going to keep on sailing further into the Drake Passage to maybe find a couple whales, or leave now before it was too late. But as Captain Brighton weighed his options, he suddenly noticed something over the horizon. There was this dark shape.
Excuse me.
And at first, he actually thought he was hallucinating, because really, there's nothing else out here. It's just him and ocean and ice. That was it. But as he continued to stare in the direction of this dark object, which was actually getting closer to him, he realized it was a real thing, and in fact, it was another ship, which was really surprising, because again, nobody really comes out here. And so his instincts were, okay, this has got to be a rival whale ship. I mean, that's the only other people who would come out here. But as he continued to stare at the ship, as it got closer, he realized it was not a whale ship. It was actually a schooner, which is a ship designed for traveling.
Now, I asked this last time. I didn't get an answer, but you all also didn't see the video last time because I couldn't. Okay. A schooner. You can take it into, some seas and shit, but it's not made for that kind of ocean voyage, right? That's more for, calm, right? I imagine it could probably handle a little bit of the weather and shit. I don't know. I like trains more than I like boats. I don't like the down deep dark water. But wouldn't a schooner be less suited for where it's at than a whaling ship? Wouldn't a whaling ship be more like, "Oh, big boy, I come in like a wrecking ball"? I mean, ain't it some shit like that? I don't know. If you know, leave it in the comments below. I'd like to learn. I love learning. Learning's fun.
But as Captain Brighton stared at the schooner that was getting closer and closer, he saw it was in pretty rough shape. I mean, the hull and the sails were very tattered. I mean, there was something off about the ship. But Captain Brighton was thinking, hey, I know you can get trapped in the ice out here. It happened to them the night before. Maybe this crew has gotten trapped in the ice. They've been stuck out here for who knows how long. They could be in pretty rough shape. And Captain Brighton knew they actually did have, at least at that moment, quite a bit of supplies, at least some to spare. And so he called out to his men to ready a dinghy and get some supplies because they were gonna go over to this schooner and basically offer up some extra supplies and also check in on them and make sure they were okay. And so once the supplies were packaged up and put on the dinghy, Captain Brighton, along with 4 other men, hopped in the dinghy and they began paddling over to the schooner. And as they got closer, the waves were pretty bad. And so they're kind of jostling around and, the ship itself, the schooner is also moving. And so that's moving up and down. But, periodically as they got closer, they'd be able to look into the portholes, which are like windows on the side of the schooner. And Captain Brighton could clearly see there were people inside of the schooner. He called out a few times, but it was windy and sort of loud. And he couldn't really tell if any of them heard him or if anybody called back. And so eventually, Captain Brighton and his crew, they got to the side of the schooner and...
See, the first time I watched this, I was like, man, I don't know how comfortable I would feel going up to a boat that shouldn't be where it's at with people that are just ignoring you when you're getting up on the boat. Like, you know what I mean? Seems awfully shady. For one, why is a schooner in the frozen water? 2, why is no one answering me? 3, why ain't we paddling back?
They just climbed up the ladder and boarded the ship.
Completely valid.
Once they were on the ship, once they were on the deck of the schooner, they're looking around and everything was in working order, albeit
this poop deck looks like shit.
It's sort of tattered and in rough shape. But the weird thing is nobody was out on deck. They had seen people in the portholes, which was inside the ship, but there was nobody above deck.
Maybe it's too cold.
So Captain Brighton's thinking, okay, this is pretty weird here.
Ooh, I know. But what if the situation is they're just cold? Like, they're not supposed to be there. A storm came. They ended up there like some Gilligan Island shit. I like Gilligan's Island. I'm just saying, maybe they went on a 3-hour tour and just never fucking came back. Now they cold.
But we clearly just need to go inside and talk to someone. And so Captain Brighton and his men walked across the deck to this door that led into the ship. It actually led into the captain's quarters, at least, based on basic ship construction, that's what they expected it to be. And so Captain Brighton, he gets to the door, he knocks and calls out, announces that they're here with supplies and just to make sure everybody is okay. But there's no answer. All they can hear is the slapping of the water.
How did you stay warm on a boat? Could you build a fire on a boat? Like, that seems awfully dangerous on a wooden boat.
Against the ship, there's no voices, there's nothing. It's silent on the ship. And so Captain Brighton eventually just opens up this door, and sure enough, he looks into this dark space, and it's the captain's quarters. And there's a desk towards the back of this room, and there's a man sitting at the desk with his back to them. And so Captain Brighton, he takes a cautious step into the captain's quarters, and he calls out to this man who clearly appears to be the captain.
Oi!
But the man doesn't say or do anything. He's clearly focused on something at his desk. And so Captain Brighton exchanged a worried glance with his men, and then just decided he would walk across the room and go physically interact with this guy and make sure he was okay and see what was going on here. And so slowly, Captain Brighton began walking across the room, and as he did, he called out a few more times to this man who appeared to be the captain, but he didn't get a response. And then finally, he was right behind the man, and he actually looked down and read what the man had been writing. This is what it said. Trapped by icebergs. Despite all efforts, the fire went out last night. No hope remains. However, as unsettling as that would be to read for anybody in this situation, what was the most unsettling part was actually what was written right above that journal entry. The date, January 17th, 1823. 16 years before. That captain and his entire crew were all dead, and had been for 16 years. They got trapped in the ice just like Captain Brighton had, but it didn't break up. They were stranded, and they all froze to death.
Like that movie, Day After Tomorrow. Ain't that the name of the movie? I think that's the name of the movie. Where everyone freezes.
And because it was so cold out in that part of the world, all their bodies were basically preserved in their final moments. And so the captain of the ship, before he died, was making an entry to say what happened. And then down below, when Captain Brighton and his men went to go look, they found people playing cards who had literally frozen to death while playing cards. They found a woman lying in her bed with her dog. That's how they froze to death. They found
that was not a real photo. It said not a real photo at the top.
People in the dining hall, and they died right where they were sitting. It was like all these people had been frozen in time for nearly 2 decades, just floating around in Drake's Passage. And basically nobody had found them until Captain Brighton.
That's so sad. That's the second time ever, and that's still sad as shit.
Thank you to BetterHelp for sponsoring today's video. In honor of Mental Health Awareness Month, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the stigma around mental health support. For a lot of us, it sort of seems like the way society tells us how to deal with our problems is by ourselves and sort of quietly.
Yeah.
That admitting to your issues and seeking the help you need sort of signals that you're weak or that you're not taking this opportunity to, build character. And that's totally false. However, it is undeniable, and studies have shown that most adults, at least in America, believe that these societal beliefs and sort of the stigma is the main thing keeping people from getting the mental health support that they need. In the past, I've talked about the fact that I began seeking out mental health support for myself back in 2017 when I left the military. And even though I really was objectively struggling, and I knew it, I knew I had issues, right? Despite that, I really struggled to reach out and get the help I needed because of this stigma. However, I did eventually decide that this was more important. I reached out, I got the help that I needed, and thank goodness I did, because honest to goodness, it saved my life. And so if you can relate to this and you have issues right now that maybe are sort of unresolved and you think maybe you could use some help, consider giving therapy a try. And a great therapy option that's highly accessible is BetterHelp. BetterHelp is entirely online, which makes it very accessible. It's easy to start. All you have to do is fill out a quick questionnaire online, and then in as little as a couple of days, you can be paired up with a licensed therapist. And then if at any point you don't align with your therapist, you can switch at no additional cost. Going to therapy is a sign of strength, not weakness. BetterHelp makes therapy simple with 10% off your first month to help you get started. Click the link in the description below, or go to betterhelp.com/MrBallen and get 10% off your first month of therapy. Okay, back to today's stories.
On the run.
On the night of May 20th, 1958, a young man named Ram Thapa walked towards the entrance of an abandoned airport in eastern India. He was trailing behind 3 other men. They were his boss, another employee of his boss, and then a friend of his boss. It was pitch black outside, and so all 4 men had flashlights. But Ram also had something else. He had a huge knife. So the reason they were there is Ram's boss was considering buying this airport. However, there were these rumors floating around that this airport was now haunted ever since being abandoned. In fact, people said, the old hangars and rusted out buildings were infested with ghosts.
Yeah.
Now, Ram totally believed that this place really was haunted. But Ram's boss wanted to go and check it out, before he actually considered really.
Oh no. All I did was push pause and it took us back to the freaking beginning. Hold on. I think that's about right. We're probably going to have to...
black outside.
Let's take it back just a little bit, just to be safe. I was going to ask... What's his thought process on the knife, on the ghost? I don't know a lot about ghostesses. You know what I mean? I'm not a ghostesses person. I know there's different kinds of ghostesses, and I'm hobbyist when it comes to ghosties. I'm not a professional. My hobbyist question is, what the fuck was this motherfucker thinking a knife is going to do against a fucking ghost? A zombie, maybe. Vampire, doubtful. But a ghost, not at all. Stab through it. It's fucking stupid. Take a Bible, some holy water, something like that. Like a religious relic. Was your knife blessed by God? Or any God? A preacher? A someone? I don't know. I just don't think a knife is going to do much.
And an airport in eastern India. He was trailing behind 3 other men. They were his boss, another employee of his boss, and then a friend.
Once again, sorry it restarted. I don't know what is going on, man. Like, I'm having problems.
Of his boss. It was pitch black outside, and so all 4 men had flashlights. But Ram also had something else. He had a huge knife.
See,
so
what
the
is
reason
it
they were
for?
there is Ram's boss was considering buying this airport. However, there were these rumors floating around that this airport was now haunted ever since being abandoned. In fact, people said, the old hangars and rusted out buildings were infested with ghosts. Now, Ram totally believed that this place really was haunted. But Ram's boss wanted to go and check it out, before he actually considered really buying this place. And so he had recruited these 3 other guys, Ram included, to go basically on a ghost hunt. And so going into this, Ram's boss and the 2 other men, they're sort of like, okay, this is intriguing. It's kind of funny that we're going on this ghost hunt. But Ram, he was terrified. He did not like the idea of going into this airport, especially at night. I mean, he fully believed there were ghosts out here. I mean, he had brought the knife along to protect himself from ghosts. But his boss was basically telling him that he had to go, and so Ram was there. And so Ram's boss reached the gate, he unlocked it, and pushed it open. And as it slowly swung open, it made this horrible creaking sound, and for the first time, all 4 men are getting an unobstructed view into the actual property. And it's totally, again, pitch black, and they're shining their lights inside, and all they see are just these old hangars and different big buildings and broken down planes, but there's no movement. It's totally dark and it's quiet. And so Ram's boss and the other 2 men, they're walking along, and Ram's in the back, and he's so uneasy, he feels practically sick to his stomach. I mean, everywhere he looked, he would think that he saw a shadow, a ghost staring back at him, but he would shine the light and, nothing would be there. And so this whole time they're walking, he's totally on edge.
See, that's the creepiest thing about everything whenever you're like ghost hunting, or even if you're just like out somewhere and it's dark and you got one of those minds that plays tricks on you. The worst part is thinking that there's something there, but never really seeing it, just catching glimpses of it like, oh, I know I saw something. I know I did. That messes with you more than I think probably actually seeing something, because then you can just be scared and run away. But if you think you see something, you got to go look. You got to go look. It's not a good idea. It's a horrible idea to go look. Don't go look. But we go and we look. Oh. So yeah, I get that. That's hard. That's rough. That's some rough shit, bro.
And eventually they reached the actual runway. And when they got there, instead of shining their lights kind of straight out in front of them, because there was basically nothing out ahead of them, it was just, where planes go to take off and to land, they began shining their lights predominantly off to the side, where there was this huge hangar, and they were all shining their lights in the different windows just to see if anybody was inside of there. And so they're all kind of focused off to the side, and Ram, the whole time, he's totally terrified here. And as, his boss and his friends are kind of shining their lights over here, Ram takes his flashlight and he aims it straight out in front of them. And he sees maybe a couple 100 meters away, just off to the side of the runway, is what appears to be this floating orb. And immediately he keeps his light trained on this orb, and he signals to his boss and the others like, hey, look at this. And they all turn and they're kind of like, joking around, and they shine their light and they also see it. They see this floating orb. It made no sense. They noticed that there was not just this orb of light, but there was something below the orb of light, like on the ground. Something was moving, this grayish figure, or multiple figures were kind of like moving around right beneath this orb. But before any of them could say or do anything or react really in any way to whatever it was they were looking at, the dark figures right below the orb, as they're being illuminated by all their flashlights, it was like all of a sudden, whatever they were, they turned, and all these eyes glinted and looked directly back at Rom and his colleagues. And it was like something inside of Rom just clicked. He was so scared. He'd been terrified from the moment they got here, and the whole time he had been so primed to protect himself if he had to with this knife. And it was like when he saw these eyes, he didn't have any idea what they were, but he knew they were evil.
They gotta
And
die.
if he didn't act, they were doomed.
If they're
So,
dead, they gotta
without
die
saying
again.
anything to his boss or the other two men, with knife in hand, Rom took off running towards the figures. A few hours later, Rom and his colleagues were no longer at the airport. Instead, they were at the police station, and Rom was in handcuffs. It would turn out those figures that they spotted that Rom went to go confront with his knife were not actually ghosts. Instead, they were three women who had come onto the airfield as well, but just to pick flowers. That orb of light that the men had seen was just their lantern. Rom had been so convinced they were ghosts that he had taken off and attacked them with his knife,
Damn.
believing he was not only protecting
Damn.
himself, but protecting his boss and the other two men.
Shit's crazy, bro.
However, he had been wrong. These were just women, and he killed one of them and severely wounded the other two. And so ultimately, he was charged with murder and assault. However, when he went on trial, he was actually acquitted of all charges because the jury genuinely believed that Rom actually thought he was attacking ghosts, not people.
Fucked up, ain't it? God. Some craziness, bro. This one I remember quite well.
On April 9th, 2005, in Kaohsiung City, Taiwan, a young man was home alone inside of his apartment watching TV. And as he sat there watching TV, he heard a loud thumping sound coming from right above him. As soon as he heard it, he muted his TV and he listened for a second, and a minute later, he heard it again, a loud thump. And then he heard another one, and another one, and another one, and before long, all he heard was a succession of thumps and also what sounded like chanting coming from upstairs. However, as unusual as these types of sounds might be to the average person, to this young man, these actually weren't that weird. Because the family that lived right above him, the Wu family, were pretty eccentric. They were very religious people who often did these ceremonial dances and rituals at all hours. And a lot of times they involved stomping around and chanting really loudly. And as annoying as that could be, this young man never complained. He was very respectful of the Wu family, and he knew, these sounds he was hearing were connected to their religion, and he felt like that was none of his business.
Yeah.
And so, like he did basically every other time he would hear these noises, he simply turned the volume up on his TV and tried to forget about them. But after a few minutes, it was like the noises coming from upstairs just kept getting louder and louder and louder until it was basically impossible to ignore. And then suddenly he heard a scream coming from upstairs that certainly did not feel attached to a ceremony. It sounded like somebody was in danger or in trouble or something. And so at that point, the young man turned the TV off and he stood up and he thought, I need to go up there and make sure things are okay. I mean, forget being annoyed. It sounds like, someone's in trouble or someone's hurt or something. But as he began making his way towards his door to go upstairs and check on the Wu family, all the noises just completely stopped.
Your ass right
and it
back
was
in your
silent
seat,
upstairs. And at that point, the young man just stopped where he was. And for a minute, he just listened, waiting to see if maybe the noises would pick back up again. But they didn't. And so the young man just turned around, walked back to his seat, and turned the TV back on. 2 days later, on April 11th, that same young man was back home all alone, watching TV yet again, when, once again, he heard a loud pounding sound. Except this time, it was not coming from upstairs, it was coming from his front door. Somebody was hammering on his front door trying to get his attention. And so the young man turned off the TV, he got up, and he went over to his door, he opened it up, and standing there on the landing was this middle-aged man named Wu Shan, who was the patriarch of the Wu family upstairs. And Wu Shan looked absolutely horrible. He was dressed all in black head to toe, but he was pale and skinny and very gaunt, and he was covered in what looked like filth, like food and ash, and he smelled unbelievably horrible. And the young man, he asked Wu Shan, like, hey, is everything okay? And remember, the young man's thinking about that crazy, loud ceremony they had just 2 days earlier, wondering, whatever happened with
This
that.
is
That was
crazy
so
too, bro.
loud. But Wu Shan just looked back at the young man with this kind of vacant expression, and he just said, call an ambulance. And then, without saying anything else, Wu Shan turned, ran down the steps, and disappeared out into the street. And so at this point, the young man is left just standing there having no idea what to think. I mean, Wu Shan did not look well and he's now run away. And again, this young man is thinking about that bizarre ritual he overheard a couple of days ago that just kind of stopped abruptly after screams were heard. Now he's being told to call an ambulance. And so he's thinking, I better go upstairs and make sure things are okay before I do anything else. And so the young man left his apartment.
Not I just
went
called the
upstairs
police
to
and
the
went
Wu
back to
family's
my apartment, turned back on my
and the door was
boob.
shut. But even standing outside the door, he began to smell that same absolutely horrible smell that he smelled on Wu Shan. And so he knocks on the Wu family's door. He's kind of covering his nose, but he doesn't get a response. Nobody comes to the door. And so after looking around, he just tried the doorknob and he found it was unlocked. And so, pretty apprehensively, but knowing he needed to see what was going on here, he opened up the door, and right away he's hit with another wave of just this disgusting smell. He can barely breathe, but nonetheless, he steps into the house and he calls out to anybody, anyone come over here and tell me what's going on. But nobody called back. And he kind of looked around the family's apartment and it was totally filthy. There was just this grime all over everything. And he made his way all the way into the living room, and there he stopped. Because in the middle of the living room on the floor, he saw something that he just simply couldn't believe. It would turn out the Wu family had performed a ritual 2 days earlier. That was the sounds that the neighbor downstairs had been hearing. Those loud stomping and screaming, all that stuff was a ceremony like the family was known to do. However, that ceremony got totally out of hand. So in the weeks leading up to that ceremony, one of the Wu family's daughters came down with an illness. And because the family didn't have a lot of money, they couldn't send her to the doctor. And after a couple of days, when she didn't get better, the family decided that, okay, well, she must not be physically sick. She must be spiritually sick, meaning she was possessed by a demon. And so at first, they tried some ceremonies to ward off this demon, but it wasn't really working. And then before long, the rest of the members of the family began complaining that maybe they too were also possessed by the same demon. And before long, that was the belief that the entire Wu family shared, that they all were possessed by demons. And so on the day the downstairs neighbor heard all that stomping and chanting and screaming, that was the day that the Wu family performed a big group exorcism to try to get rid of these demons once and for all from all of them. But the way they did this exorcism was truly horrifying. They believed that the one thing demons were afraid of was filth. And so they decided that if they filled their bodies with enough filth, the demons would leave. And so the Wu family, as they chanted and stomped around and screamed, began consuming their own feces. And when they would vomit it back up again, they would just swallow it right back down for hours and hours and hours. What the downstairs neighbor actually discovered inside the living room of the Wu family's apartment was the daughter, the one who originally had gotten sick, and she was laying on the ground and was deceased. And during the autopsy, they would discover that her airway was totally blocked by feces and vomit. By the time the downstairs neighbor made this discovery, the entire Wu family had fled the apartment. Wu Shan had disappeared after saying calling an ambulance, and the rest of the family too had kind of run off. But the police would ultimately track down all the remaining Wu family members, and they would all be arrested. However, a court ultimately decided that the Wu family was suffering from something known as mass hysteria. And as a result of that, they could not be held legally accountable for what they did. Ain't that some shit? And so they were all acquitted.
That's some shit, bro. I'm sorry.
In case you haven't heard yet,
like, I would For one, that's disgusting as shit. It'd be better if it was like human centipede style. That way they didn't have a choice but to eat shit and eat vomit. But the fact that they was just doing it, like, for one. For two, do demons like it nasty or do demons like it clean? Which one? Because any movie I've ever seen, like, there's some squalor going on. You know what I mean, bruh? I think they're just shit eaters. I think that's just what they like to do. I think they eat poo. They like that twice baked corn. I grossed myself out. I'm so sorry. Oh, God. I'm sorry. I don't get that. I don't understand that at all. I don't. This is so grody. Oh. All right. Really enjoyed watching today's video. Hopefully y'all enjoyed today's watch. Hey, I remembered. I really enjoyed today's video. Hopefully y'all enjoyed today's video as much as I did. If you did, please go down there, leave a thumbs up. It really does help the channel grow. While you're down there, if you want, go on over, slap that subscribe button, become part of the B5 Nation. We do some crazy stuff here. If you want to know when that crazy stuff happens, ding that bell and turn on all notifications. As always, be good to one another. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye. Damn, MrBallen, that's fucked. That poo-eating little motherfuckers. I'm dead.